people have told me that Stoicism has nothing to do with politics, is a thing I see a lot on the internet, which is crazy. Like the Stoics were incredibly influential in the fields of political philosophy and jurisprudence. I mean, the founding text of Stoicism, from what we can tell, we're like 90% sure about this, it seems like the main original text was Zeno's Republic, which is clues in the name. Like it was a critique of Plato's Republic. So it was very much like a political, utopian political text that founded the whole, movement, and that other Stoics would typically refer back to as their main original inspiration. Most of the main Stoics wrote books about politics and kingship and statesmanship and all this kind of stuff. So it's absurd that people, and it just shows, again, it's the Dunning-Kruger, like it just shows their own ignorance of the subject, that they don't even know like that these texts were important. It's because they've read a bit of Seneca, they've read a bit of Marcus Aurelius, and they go, "Oh, this is a bit like CBT. I don't see what that's got to do with politics." But that they have a tiny understanding of the depth of the subject. I don't think any modern serious academic for a second would say that Stoicism doesn't have anything to do with politics. That would seem bonkers to them.
Well, you'll like this one. The biggest example I have of that is someone commented on one of the posts saying that Stoicism is a slave philosophy. It's a slave mentality, right? And so I sort of challenged him on a little bit. He said, well, it's very easy to see that Epictetus writes as if he's a slave. And I said, he doesn't write as if he was a slave. He was literally a slave. So it just goes to show like how ignorant people are to what I don't know. But it's like you said, you come into it with these ideas and then you just, you think you understand it, you just throw it.
Is when people say contradictory things, right?
Yeah.
So you get the people saying Stoicism is for slaves, and then you get people saying Stoicism is the philosophy of a privileged white elite in Roman society. It's a kind of cliche that you hear. Even occasionally some academics will say that. Now they're both wrong. They're both absurd, like, because they're massive general. Some rich dudes were into it, so were some slaves. Like, so let's just, again, it's an obvious kind of confirmation bias. So I'm going to ignore the fact that slaves were into it, and I'm going to say it's a philosophy for the rich elite, or I'm going to ignore the fact that wealthy, powerful statesmen are into it, or say it's philosophy for like slavish people or whatever. You're both wrong, like, because the reality is people from all like walks of society were into Stoicism. And the founder of Stoicism, Zeno, was a merchant who was shipwrecked and lived as a cynic, i.e., lived like a beggar and slept rough on the streets and stuff like that. Later he was put up by one of his students. He didn't own a house. And, his student Cleanthes famously watered gardens at night for a living. He was a retired boxer, and he lived in poverty. Marcus Aurelius, obviously, was one of the most powerful men in European history. And Seneca was one of the, was like a Warren Buffett or Jeff Bezos of his time. He was one of the wealthiest men in history, which is another story. Like, so we've got these rich and powerful people, and then the idea that somehow maybe I suppose somebody could say that Marcus Aurelius is slave if they want to be really Nietzschean and paradoxical about it. They could say, well, Marcus Aurelius, he might be Roman emperor, but like he's got a kind of slavish, kind of Christian-like attitude. Like, so if they were trying to make the argument maybe that Nietzsche's making, this is the only way I can try and make sense out of that. But you couldn't say that about other Stoics. Like, you wouldn't say it about Scipio Africanus, for example, the guy who conquered Carthage, was a student of Stoicism. Like, I mean, how far are you going to like stretch this argument? That because you'd have to, you're going to dismiss even all these very powerful, influential Roman statesmen and leaders in other nations. One of the first students of Stoicism was a guy called Antigonus II Gonatas, who was a Macedonian king or emperor. Was a student of Zeno, and so he was a powerful military leader and statesman at the time, right at the beginning of Stoicism. And then other Stoics went and taught the Spartans and stuff like that. So it's an absurd idea to say that it's slavish. But people who say stuff like that are, they're just like talking heads on the internet, right? Like, so there are people that tweet stuff and then never back it up with any. These are the guys, like, their confidence in what they're saying is, in completely contrast to the level of familiarity with the texts that they're talking about, or the people that they're talking about.
Yeah, what was interesting, because you mentioned Marcus Aurelius, because that was one of my my rebuttals was like, okay, well, look at Marcus Aurelius. He was far from a slave. He's one of the most powerful, like as you mentioned, one of the most powerful people, and the response was something like, well, didn't he have parents? Didn't he have mentors? And I said, okay, so if you're making that case, then everyone's a slave, and so it's not just Stoics that are slaves. Anyways, just utter nonsense. I'd like to segue a little bit into
confirmation bias. So if somebody's got the idea, then they'll try to twist everything. Right.
Oh, I know. And yeah, at some point you just got to move on with move on with your life.